All right, our next speaker is Mariana Montes from KU Leuven, and she's going to talk about Python package for metadata schemas.
Thank you, Rory. Hi. If you have attended the Iris UGM last year and seen my presentation there, this is like not a part two, but a spin-off, let's say. I will do a previously on in any case for you to know. I would like to first make a reference that was obviously unplanned to the keynote talk from earlier. We were talking about dark data. And one way in which we from K11 are trying to battle this and help people have their data more discoverable is to help them use standardized metadata. So I'm going to talk about the Mango Metadata Schema Manager. So it's an application within the Mango portal. The Mango portal is a web interface that we have created for our Iris users at K11. But if you can see tomorrow's talk by Paul, you can see how you can get your own Mango portal if you want. How we use a JSON file to indicate instructions on how to standardize the metadata, how you want your standard to look like. And so I will show how we turn this into validation via Python and how you can create a Python dictionary with the metadata that you want to be added, how that gets turned into AVUs and back, and then some final thoughts on why we are doing this. So the Mango Metadata Schema Manager, the idea is we want users to be able to standardize, have conventional metadata. So for example, you may have a data manager, data steward in the team that has an idea, okay, we want metadata to have these fields and these values, and there are the possible values, or you want to do certain kind of validation. And a very good way to insert this kind of metadata, if, for example, you are not the data manager, or say you want to annotate your data with metadata, and then you want to remember 3 months on how you annotated it, so you can actually query it and remember the different ways in which you could have annotated it. So the idea is that the Mango portal offers forms with a kind of where you can fill in your metadata. So for example, say you're annotating a book and you can add a field for a book title, and it's required, so you cannot add this kind of metadata until you add that one. You can add a publishing date that is that it has to be a date that can be duplicated. You could have multiple publishing dates. You could have the colors in the cover, and you have kind of a checkboxes, so you select how many of a certain range of colors. So these things are very easy to create in a form. And then in the Mango portal, in the web interface, you can see the metadata that you have annotated in a rather nice way that is not just a table, but you can see the names and the values. You can see when things have multiple values for the same name. You also have composite fields, which allow you to have hierarchy. So if you have data metadata for a book, but maybe you have metadata of the author of the book, there is no metadata of the book anymore, in the sense that you might want to say, okay, I have the name of the author, the surname of the author, the email of the author, and to indicate this hierarchy, because they're not the name of the book, then you can create these composite fields. And you can also have them duplicate. So you can have multiple authors, and the visualization here tells you what is paired to what. And we do that via namespacing and units. I'm not going to explain that because that's from the talk from last year and the paper from last year, so you can go check it. So the idea is also that in the web browser, you can design your own form, because we're not going to say how you should annotate your data. Maybe you look up some standard that is useful for you, but the idea is that any researcher, any user of Iris can generate their form and edit it like that. Okay, so this is the previously on, this is what we did last year. One of the questions in the last year was, do you have server-side validation? Because we are doing this in JavaScript, you have user client-side validation, and the Mango portal is a Flask application. So on the server, we are doing Python with PRC. The question, do you also do server-side validation? The answer was no. Now the answer is also no. But we are getting closer because now we have a Python package that does this validation. So we just have to plug it into the Mango portal, and then we'll have server-side validation. But say that you have a PRC workflow, you are using the Python to communicate with IROs, you want to use metadata schemas, you created your schema. So after you do this, you create a JSON like this based on a JSON schema that gives you the information of what is the name, the version of your schema, and what are the different items and what are the different requirements that you have for each of them. This is in a very readable thing. And so what if you wanted to use this and create code in Python and then add a lot of metadata to a lot of data, or extract it automatically from a file, validate it with a schema based on what you want, or it comes from another source. So what if you want to automate this via Python and not just go through the portal, fill in the forms and so on? Because for some people, buttons are good. Other people want to code in Python. So that's where this package comes in. So you can pip install MongoMD schema. You have your Python code in which you want to add metadata, validating it with a schema. So you have your normal code for your session, you recover whatever thing you want to add metadata to. You can just write your dictionary of metadata. In this case, for example, you import it from a JSON that has your metadata. I'm going to show you what that looks like. And then you import Mongo metadata schema. You instantiate a schema class with the file that I showed before that you created from the Mongo metadata schema manager, or you wrote by hand maybe. And then you just apply it. And that's it. So what is it that's happening there? You have this whole JSON. You open it with your instantiate the schema, and then in the outputs, you can just print it and say that you didn't generate the schema. You want to see what kind of validation is going to happen. You can have in a more descriptive way what are the different items, what is required, what kind of items they are. And you can also ask the requirements of specific fields. What should I have as publishing date? What should I have as publisher? If there are different values, if it's required, if it's repeatable. If it's required, it can have a default value. So maybe you want to automatically fill in metadata that is not going to be provided. You have also, in this case, here in the publisher, it says choose one of the values. And in this one, it choose at least one of the following values, because that was like the checkbox. So you can just basically parse the description of the JSON file. So what does my schema require? So this is basically Python printing you a description of the form that you saw before, just to examine. This is obviously not the important part. It's just like kind of documentation thingy that you can have to understand what you're doing. But the meat of the code is you have metadata like this. Your metadata can have hierarchies. It can have arrays if you have multiple values for the same name. You can have lists of hierarchies within dictionaries, and you can just apply it to your object, or you can first check, is it okay? And in this case, if you just validate it and you don't have any logging or anything, it will just return a cleaned up version, let's say. Yes. So we have just a normal required field title. You did the right name. You gave a valid value. It's okay. It just moves on. You can have this list of composite fields. In this case, it was also okay. You will notice that in the output, the email is also in an array, and that's because the email is repeatable. The same person could have multiple emails. So it automatically turns it into an array. You could have the publishing date. You have to give it in ISO format or as a datetime object, and it gets turned into a datetime object. And here we are giving an array of the colors that we chose, but some of them were not accepted. So it just takes the ones that were accepted and discards the others quite quietly. And you can also see that at the bottom is a publisher Tor. You did not give a publisher, but the publisher was a required field with a default value. So it just gives it. This can be a bit aggressive if you're not expecting these changes. So you you can have this message if you open them up. You can also have error messages if you have something that is really bad. So if, for example, you provide an email that doesn't match the regular expression that you need for the email, it's going to give you a validation error. We wanted a Leuven address and you gave another address that doesn't match, so you cannot submit any of this metadata. Say that you give a date in a format that is not accepted by the package currently. Says, I cannot convert this to a date because we just tried with either with the date class or with the datetime date from ISO format method. And so if you don't match one of those, then it just ignores it. And it says, I cannot convert it to a date, so I cannot do anything now. So none of the metadata gets added. And if you want to know about these warnings of all the transformations that were done before, and a bit more, such as, hey, there are these fields that are not required, but you didn't submit them, you can use login. And login is going to give you very verbose information, such as we upload the default value to the required field book publisher. There were some values in the cover colors that were not allowed, so they were discarded, but these are the ones that are allowed. And then there are some non-required fields in either book, which is the full schema, or book.author, which is the composite fields, or like child schema, and they were like missing. And so you have that information if you want it. So what's the part that you actually need for IROS, getting actually to what you would use is, suppose you get this data object, doesn't have any metadata, you got the metadata that I showed before, and you want to turn it into AVUs. So it's going to add the namespaces that we define. So it starts with a prefix MGS for Mango schema, but you can change the prefix when instantiating the schema class. You have the name of your schema. And then if you have composite fields in any nested level, it adds periods. It has a string, obviously, all the values. And then when you have composite fields, you have numbers to keep them in the units, to keep them together so that then you know what belongs with which. And if you just use apply, then those metadata get added to your object. If you had previous metadata from the same schema, they get deleted. So not added or removed, just like everything that is old from the same schema gets out, everything new gets added. And you also have information of the version of the schema. So if you have different versions of your schema, different forms, then you can keep track of which version was used to annotate this. And you can also do it the other way around. You already have your AVUs from a schema, and you say, okay, I have this schema. I know I have AVUs in this data object or collection or whatever based on the schema, and I can extract them and retrieve the old, the original dictionary if that is useful for you. So to conclude, metadata schemas offer you formal validation and default values and a hierarchical structure. And with Python, you might have other needs like processing the data, reading the metadata from files, or something that is not just clicking. And this is marrying them together so that you can use in Python, but also have the validation, writing and reading this kind of structured metadata. You have the namespace, the versioning, everything together. Just instead of buttons, you can code it in Python, and you can install it with pip install very easily. That's it. Thank you for listening.
All right. Any questions? We got one right here.
Thanks for your talk. So this is like you say, you want users to define their own schema, which is I completely agree. You want different communities to have different schemas, and then you run into the trouble of compatibility of different schemas with each other. So do you enforce any form of minimal common ground so that there is some sort of way that you can link it all back together, or do you keep it completely open per schema?
In what sense, issues of compatibility? What would be the
Well, I think
case?
if you want to index, you want to make sure that you, or at least in my opinion, you want to make sure that you have some minimal set of metadata that's common across all data objects, so that you have something to index towards, for example. So that you can provide, a portal over your complete set of data if you want to do that.
No, we don't enforce any. Yeah, you can give the microphone to Paul, I think.
Indeed, we do not enforce any standards right now, but we do have efforts to standardize nevertheless. And one of the things is what Mariana also did is creating actually a standard library of typical metadata fields, say an author, say an affiliation or something. And these are standardized according to international standards. So people can build up their schemas with the correct identifiers and so on, or labels or whatever, plus all the validation that goes along. And we will be sure that if the user uses that it will be found back in a standardized way.
But there is no enforcement of kind of metadata or metadata schemas that users have to use across of Mango. They are absolutely free to use a little bit, use their own schema, use multiple schemas, use no metadata at all. We try to encourage them to use metadata, but there is no enforcement of that kind.
But we do encourage.
Indexing does not, sorry?
But we do encourage.
Yeah, we do encourage, but indexing for searching and in the portal and so on does not rely on metadata.
Any other questions?
Okay, online question. What happens if the AVU is larger than 2,700 characters, the limit that can fit in the database column?
I don't know. We have tried. Yeah.
We got a question right here.
I was wondering if the users are actually happy, and usually if they start working with new things such as implementing metadata and stuff, they might get a feel that they have to invent the wheels themselves, and they want to get more support and ask for standards and those kinds of things. How do you work with that?
So a lot of the development of the metadata schema, so the portal and Mango in general right now is 1 year old. So it's also like slowly catching up. There's not too much use yet. But a lot of the metadata schema manager and schema stuff is being developed in collaboration with metadata librarians, people who work at the libraries of the faculties and that have an idea of, for example, the kind of metadata that researchers would need to use to then deposit the data for publishing. So we only work with active metadata, but then we already have an idea. I think we still have the problem of not many researchers knowing that they need and that this is useful and how they could use it. So we are still working on that part at the research level, but then on which kind of standards or what kind of things are useful for them, we are now talking with specialists on metadata and research on like kind of like as a interface between us and the researchers and gathering their needs based on what they're doing.
I had one. You mentioned the server-side component as far as server-side validation, right? When there are validation errors, do those messages, do the nice clean messages propagate back to clients, or is that just it's just logged in the server log somewhere?
So right now, so if talking about the Python package or the JavaScript application?
The Python package, the thing that would run on this for the server side, right?
Okay, so here on the server side would mean like the validation is done before sending anything to iRoots.
Okay.
So that's why. When I was talking about server side validation, I was talking about the web portal, the Mango portal that has a backend of Python, and there we are not doing any validation. We are only doing it on the JavaScript side with just bootstrap inputs and so on. And if the form does not fit what you're supposed to, it just doesn't send. But if you change the HTML and change those things, then it's going into send, and that's a bit dangerous. So we don't have any, but this could be used on the server side on that sense, on the Python backend of the application. But here is like any validation, if you send things that are not matching the JSON schema that you created, then it's just never going to be sent to Iris.
Okay.
We did have, so just to share that when I was testing the package, there was a moment when we were doing this conversion as a way of validating formats. And then when you had to validate a number, we were converting it to a number, and we were not converting it back to a string. And so we were trying to do these atomic operations with metadata that have numbers in the values. And then Iros gave us a very helpful message of network error. That was a whole day of figuring out where the problem was. But that's, for example, something you want to add numbers. You want to make sure that your metadata value is a number, and then submit it to Iros and make sure you're actually submitting something that Iros is going to accept. This package can help there.
All right. All right. Thank you.
Yeah.